Well, I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for having me, for inviting me to this panel. The name of the panel is Beyond Innovation, How Technology Accelerates Financial Inclusion. And we have here four experts on the topic. So I will very briefly introduce them to you, and I'll let them introduce themselves to you and tell us what they do. And I'm going to start with you, Mercedes Lopez Arratia. She's the CMO of Banco Azteca. After that, I would love for Christina Junqueira over there to talk us about Nubank. After that, I would love Juan Sadurni from Accenture to tell us what they're doing regarding financial inclusion. And ending with you, Kristen, with Rappi. So let's go. With no further ado, let's start, Mercedes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I really want to thank the Women's Forum for this opportunity. This is the first time that Banco Azteca is part of this event, and it has been a couple of very inspirational days, so thank you so much. And I've been working all my life in financial services, and I have been with Banco Azteca for 3 years, and our core market is actually the base of the pyramid. We are a bank that only has 15 years in the market, and we are proud to be the biggest branch network in the country. And what's interesting is for 20% of the municipalities that we are in, we are the only bank. The other thing that's interesting is less than 50% of our population is bancarized. So or the Mexican population, and one of our core competencies is actually bancarizing people and bancarizing women. We have more than 7 million banking accounts, and 60% of them are for women. Women that not necessarily tell their husbands that they have that savings, because those savings help them to create a different life or start a business. The other thing that's interesting is 60% of all the personal loans in Mexico are given from Banco Azteca, which means that 3 of every 5 women receive a credit personal loan from Banco Azteca. The other thing that to me is really interesting is we're the biggest banking employer in Mexico. Many of them are women, but we work 360 days a year, 9 to 9. So that requires a lot of changes, even in our hours, in order to making sure that women is able to work in the different times and being able still to be at home working. So I am really, really proud of being part of this organization. And the other thing that I wanted to share with you is from all the remittances that come from the United States to Mexico, 60% of them are paid in Banco Azteca. And most of them are women that receive this money, and that's the way that they feed their families. So one of the things that we have done is created a new insurance that protects them through through their commute between the bank and their homes, in order that they can be protected and their money can be protected for a while. So we have been producing a number of products that fit the women's need, not necessarily because they are pink or because they are just named for women, but also because we think about them and we think about their needs, and we're trying to work on that. So I think that's my 4 minutes already.
Thank you, Mercedes. Then I'd like to introduce to you Christina Junqueira. She's co-founder and vice president of Nubank, a pioneer bank regarding FinTech and financial inclusion. Christina, please introduce yourself and what Nubank does.
Sure. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the invite from the Women's Forum. As was said, I'm one of the very few female founders of a fintech company worldwide, and the one female founder of one of the few unicorns that we have down in Brazil. And it is a great responsibility to all women everywhere, to our customers, to our shareholders, right, to our investors, to society, to build a company that is true, diverse, not just in its goals, but also in its team and in the way that it does things. And I want to start telling the story of Nubank on a little bit of my story. So before starting this company, I was working to one of the incumbent banks in Brazil, the largest incumbent banks in Brazil. And I was just very done with fighting the corporate structure to let me do what was right by my customers and my shareholders. It's very sad when you realize that the purpose of your work is just making rich people richer, especially when that comes through screwing customers. And that's essentially what I was doing. So I quit my job the day that I got the highest bonus of my life. And I'm so glad that I did, because that led me to meet my partner, David, who's our CEO and my co-founder. And we started on this journey to fight complexity and to give back people control over their finances. Because the truth is, more than often, people are held hostages of all the complexity, of everything that they do not understand, of how little they know about where their money goes. And I think that touches on inclusion and a lot of the topics that we're going to touch on here today. Because when you don't understand, when you're so overwhelmed by what seem to be choices that you have, or just how much information you need to navigate through to barely understand what's going on, or paperwork that you need to fill out to have access to better options, that all that is just this smoke curtain keeping you from truly understanding what your potential is and what you can do with your own money. And we started off with this vision, but also very certain that we needed this very strong and diverse team to accomplish it. Because if we had a lot of people around our offices that just looked like us, or sounded like us, or went to the same schools as we did, or worked for the same companies that we didn't need them. It was enough to have the two of us, right? Like, we needed different people from different backgrounds with different opinions, so that we could blend all that together into better products and better services. So I'm proud to report that 6 years later, after we started it in Brazil, Nubank has around 1,600 employees. We're serving now roughly 9 million consumers in Brazil. Over 30 million people in Brazil have applied for a card. We started with a credit card in Brazil. And we've since then launched a savings account and a debit card and a personal loan. And we're on track to finally, freeing everyone from being held hostages of all that bullshit. We also did that in a very diverse and inclusive way. Out of the 1,600 people that we have working for Nubank in Brazil, more than 40% of them are women, which is insane when you think about technology and financial services. We have around 30% of them that identify as LGBTQ, which is also crazy. And we still have a lot of room to do better on that sense. We, as diverse as we are, we're probably the most diverse company in Brazil today. We feel that we don't have enough people that come from different social backgrounds or different ethnicities, although we have a lot of nationalities. We have over 25 nationalities represented at Nubank today. And that's probably one of the keys for how inclusive our products have been. I think you mentioned that you're in every municipality in Mexico or something, right, with the branches? Nubank has reached also all the 5,700 municipalities in Brazil. We have customers everywhere with both the credit card and the savings account in Brazil, which is insane, because the way that we think about inclusion is not, just being available. It's actually when you make something that any person with a smartphone from anywhere that is connected can open an account in less than 3 minutes, just with their IDs, and pay nothing for that, that's true inclusion. That's removing all the barriers, all the friction from people actually having access to a product that will improve their financial lives. So that's a little bit of how we think about financial inclusion. Thanks. I don't know, I probably used my time already.
That's
Thanks.
okay, that's okay, Christina. Juan, let me introduce to you Juan Sadurni. Juan Sadurni works at Accenture. He is a managing director from Accenture Digital Service Group. Go ahead, Juan.
Thank you, Valeria, and thank you, everybody. It's incredibly exciting to be here. This is one of the forums in which you aspire to participate, because the level of asymmetry that exists in our economy and our society is brutal. Whenever people ask me, what do you guys do at Accenture? I try to summarize it. I don't think I am very successful when I do it, but we help large companies transform themselves in order to gain the capacity to be more digital. Now, the real question is, what is it to be digital? And being in a forum like this and talking about inclusion, and talking specifically about financial inclusion, gives me the answer. So to an extent, a benefit of being here is that I've learned really what we do, and it's helping people join the economy in a much more effective way. And when you think of sectors of the population that are not particularly benefited of inclusion, it's precisely women. When you think about it, 50% of the world's population are women, and by not incorporating them into the formal economy, the formal channels, etc., we're losing an enormous brain power, capacity, tenacity, diversity, emotion, everything that women bring. Now, when you look at the results of this digitalization in the financial sector specifically, you start looking at certain trends that are very common. FinTechs that are originated or managed by women tend to be much more successful. The same thing happens with the rest of the companies, but particularly for FinTechs. This intersection between technology and financial services, this is particularly true because it is a sector that integrates customer experience, the sensitivity of the client, the one tool that many people have to join the rest of the formal sectors in the economy are precisely financial services. And by not having access to them, either as the capacity to found financial companies, and it's very exciting to have someone that has created a unicorn here, is fantastic. So inclusion means in this level the capacity to found companies, the capacity to use the services of these companies, and the capacity to manage these companies. And all of that is to a large extent provided by technology. One of the main things that we've learned is that through technology, by the usage of data, by the usage of tools in the cloud and all of these things that you hear, by the use of artificial intelligence and everything that comes with the digitization of the services, you gain a type of insight about your clients, about your operations, about you as a company and as an institution that is unbeatable. And it's incredibly fantastic when you look at companies that are using financial services technology to be and gain an advantage, the edge, the leap is just formidable. This includes, among many other things, the API system. We're talking about open banking. We're talking about small companies that would not have had access in the past to sell services and to be part of the financial services world that is so large, and sometimes the barriers to entry are so large, are now getting diluted. And that is what is very exciting. So we are, I think, at a point in the evolution of services, specifically financial services, that the use of technology, the industrialization that this provides, the infrastructure from a network perspective that is being created, and the capacity to reach sectors of the population that were unreachable before is better than ever. So I'm incredibly optimistic. I think that the moment that we're at is going to bring much more women, much more inclusion into these services. And by having a strong financial sector, we're going to have a spillover effect into many other sectors that are going to be a big boost to the economy. To finish this intervention, there are many calculations and who knows which one to trust. But when you look at the size, the gain that can be gained in Mexico and Latin America as a rule, to make sure that all of these sectors of the population become integrated into the formal economy can provide up to 40 to 50% incremental GDP accumulated over the next 10 years. That's an insane amount of money, an insane amount of production that is out there in the economy, and that is for all of us to grab. So I just finished by saying that this is an exciting moment, that I think the usage of technology is being more and more common, more and more prevalent, and that the impact that we can have in terms of health, in terms of benefits to society, this welfare that we are expecting to generate is better than ever before. Thank you.
Thank you, Juan. So let me introduce to you Kristen. Kristen Hager is the head of strategic brand partnerships at Rappi, a firm that I presume all of us know, and in our way here, we saw some Rappi drivers all over the place. So, Kristen, go ahead.
I hope so. Thank you. Thank you so much for including us. This topic is really important. It's core to our business. We are a mobile commerce and last mile delivery app. That's how we started. That's the heart of our business. But it's our mission as a company to be a more inclusive platform, and quite frankly, our success in the region depends upon us being able to do that successfully. And so FinTech for us, we do have a FinTech product. It's called Rappi Pay. It's a natural extension of a commerce platform, just like Alipay, Amazon Pay, Apple Pay, and Grab. You can see that again, it's a natural extension for these commerce platforms to create an actual payments platform. So what we have access to is a large user base of customers that already trust us. They already give us information that's really sensitive. They give us banking information. They give us credit card information. And so our challenge as a company is to extend that reach outside of our network and to make sure that we are creating a product that's designed for everyone. And so we break that down into two main challenges. Number one, designing for an end user that is way more diverse than the user that we have that's a high frequency user of the application. We traditionally have started in affluent areas, right, where people have not very much time, but they have some dispensable income, and so they can actually use us and call on Rappi to do favors for them, to get dinner on the table in 30 minutes or less. If there's a mom that needs to go to the grocery store and that usually takes 2 hours, we can eliminate that for her, making their life better. So we've done really well where we can find the consumer tension or the consumer pain points and solve those for our users. We've done that really well in the app. That's why we've seen the growth that we've seen. That's why we have a user base that grows at an accelerated rate every single month. But now what we need to do and what we're starting to do via RappiPay is get into the payment platform and design a product that is made for people that don't necessarily have the dispensable income. They don't have, although they might have for your time, but really designing it that way. And so on the other side of that challenge is making sure that the people are actually, that are designing that platform for this diverse end user, that they also come from a diverse background. And we're not talking just about the gender gap that's in tech, but also the socioeconomic one. And so we think that for us as a business and technology as an industry, we are working in that area, but it's an area where we can all be doing a bit more, and we'll talk about that in a little
Yes.
while. Okay.
In your second intervention. Thank you, Kristen. Christina, I would love to hear more about your experience at Nubank, but specifically, when we talk about Latin America, sometimes we think that Mexico and Brazil are like the largest economies, and whatever works there, it may work all over the place. So you have worked in Brazil, and you're starting to work in Mexico. So I would love to hear more about your experience regarding financial inclusion. It's a huge topic, as you were mentioning, Mercedes. So what of your experience in Brazil do you hope to achieve in Mexico?
Sure, thank you. And I should have mentioned this on the first time that I spoke, that Nubank is coming to Mexico, right? So it's super interesting for us to have the opportunity to extend the work that we're doing there to include many more people here and in the region, hopefully one day. Listen, there are a lot of things that we've built in Brazil that we hope are going to be useful as we come into the Mexican market. A lot from the technology standpoint, like just to get a little bit technical, but to illustrate what we're doing, the vast majority of our tech stack, of our technology, of our systems, of our platforms, were built in-house. So our CRM platforms, or back office platforms, or processing, like payment processing platforms, we do not use anything outsourced. So we are hoping that the very core of that can be leveraged to the things that we want to do here. And sure, that's going to be great. But our main concern, because on the technology side, on the credit side, like on the underwriting side, on the regulation side, for the most part, there are answers, right? You can look into what the regulation says, or you can plug in the data sources and start building your models. But our main concern is actually the consumer, because whatever worked for us in Brazil is great, and we were able to hit this nerve and to find the right tone to communicate with consumers. We don't know if that's going to work here, and we don't want to take anything for granted. We don't want to take Mexicans for granted. We don't want to copy paste any type of solution that we have there here. So our main concern is making sure that Mexicans feel heard and understood and seen and addressed, right? And that somebody's finally listening, is finally, paying attention to what hurts and what's complex and what should change. So we've been putting in a lot of effort. I spent some time already here in Mexico doing consumer research, like deep consumer research, ethnographic research. I've been to consumers' houses and, walked around with them in stores and in malls, just trying to understand what's the essence of the people and what are their fears and their hopes and dreams, and how can better control of their finances help them through their journey. So that's our main focus right now. That's what we're trying to figure out.
And when are you starting operations in Mexico? Or have you already started?
As soon as we can. So the goal is before the year end, we're going to start with our first few customers, hopefully as soon as we can, but definitely before 2020 comes in.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Kirsten, another question. What is the industry?
Here, do you want to use mine?
What is the industry doing via FinTech to create more inclusive financial product? And I think the key here is not only more financial products, because as we all know, there are many financial products, but more inclusive financial products. And the access from the end of the user perspective and the service provider that basically is you, from your standpoint. Let me give you back your mic.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think obviously Nubank is doing a great job at this, but for us, and I mentioned this earlier, making sure again that we are looking at various types of end users. So a perfect example for us is that we built RappiPay with our Rappi couriers in mind. So for those of you who don't know Rappi, again, we are a last mile delivery service, and we have a fleet of couriers, which we refer to lovingly as our Rappitenderos. And so this traditionally is a group of society that, quite frankly, has been underbanked or unbanked. And with RappiPay, we're solving some true consumer or user tensions for them. Number one, RappiPay allows them to be cashless. That's way more secure on the streets. Number two is more convenient. With RappiPay, our couriers are able to send money between users, send money to family members. A lot of our Rappi couriers in some of our key markets are foreigners. They don't actually live in the market in which they're working, but with this international platform, they can actually transfer money back and forth easy. They can pull money out of ATM machines anywhere that they go. So it's more secure and it's more convenient. Then that leads to the next level for us, which is a platform for saving. So we're actually having a lot of fun with saving. We're through gamification and really encouraging our Rappitenderos to actually use RappiPay as a platform for saving. That automatically turns into a bank account. So, and then the next step after that is a credit program. So in these various levels that our Rappitenderos now have access to and that they can complete, that it's no frills, and they do it with, like you said, with an ID card, and they basically have access to these channels which traditionally they have not had access to. And I'm using the case of the Rappitenderos or our couriers, but that applies to all small business owners. A lot of them are women. We have an example of one of a consumer study we did recently with women that work in the streets in Bogota selling food, selling arepas, selling different types of food, and if they would be interested actually in using RappiPay as a platform to manage their finances. And they do it because of this track to actually get to a place where you could one day actually get credit. You can save money. And the power of the smartphone in your hand, that's amazing for female independence and entrepreneur independence and just human independence in general.
Well, we are now dependent on our phones. So it's independence from everybody else.
It's for everyone, yes. But the point is that you have access to the phone and then you have a very clear path on how to get from zero access to a path of credit for us, and that's really important. So I think the question is how are we designing for that? And again, it's making sure that we're creating a process and a product for an end user that is really helpful, that's solving real problems, that's solving consumer tension.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. I'd like to ask both of you, Juan and Mercedes, the same question. How you're in a traditional bank, you work in a traditional bank, Mercedes, Banco Azteca. Even if it's a different bank in the sense that it goes to most of the municipalities of the country, it is still a traditional bank. How do you see the combination, if possible, between FinTech and traditional banking? And I'd like to ask you if the regulation is keeping up to pace. I used to be, a long time ago, a regulator, and I know that regulation always comes late. No? So I would like to hear your thoughts on this.
So for us, and yes, you're right, we have a regular bank license, but actually we are not a traditional bank. And I want to talk to you, for example, about our banking app. Our new version was just launched a year ago. We have already 5 million users. 4 of them just downloaded the app in the last 12 months. The other thing that for me it's really interesting is the banks from the beginning started doing fingerprinting recognition, right? So 15 years ago, it became a law, a regulation this year, or last year, if I remember correctly, for all the banks. So we have done it from the beginning. Another thing that happened is when we launched this version of our app, we had QR payment already. So the banks right now are just testing the platform because it's going to become an obligation in September. We already have 1 million transactions made by QR code. So I think that what happens in Banco Azteca and Grupo Salinas in general is that we truly understand the Mexican market, and we as a Mexican company are really committed to the development of this country and the development of the people of this country. So I think, and someone was telling that yesterday, this idea that the private sector has the obligation also to push that, right? And not necessarily waiting for the regulation to make things happen, but if we invest, if we develop the technology, if we know our markets, it certainly will be better for the clients and the people in Mexico, but at the same time for our businesses. The other thing that I believe is regulation has two sides. And one side, of course, is development and encouragement and inclusion. But the other side that for me is really, really important and for us in the bank is security. Protect the clients, protect their investment, protect their money. So I think sometimes people just think about regulation and think that it's a problem, but I think that also it has a benefit for our consumers that needs to be obeyed, followed, and try to make it easy. And of course, we don't want more paperwork or making things difficult for the customers, but of course you need to understand that their savings need to be secured, they need to be protected, their transactions, their identity, all the information you have. And that requires, yes, regulation and also a big investment in technology and security.
Thank you, Mercedes. Juan.
I'd like to start with the point that you were making about the dual role of regulation. So yes, on one hand, it's a way for the government to make sure that there are no major crises. And when you think of regulation from that perspective, yes, always the regulation is going to come late, because the regulation learns from the crisis of the past to regulate the future, and then the system evolves, and then who knows how it's going to evolve. You cannot anticipate all of that, and then you regulate all previous crises. Now, when you think of the way the banks are changing, and not only banks, but also insurance companies, medios de pago, so the way you pay and the way you send money from one place to the other, that is one of the large categories of financial services just now. And when you think of the role of the regulator, it's a very complicated role. Because yes, on one hand, you want to protect the customer, you want to make sure they don't have a crisis, that you don't have any capital inefficiencies, etc. But also you want to make sure that you foster the growth of the sector in one category that is particularly important, which is how do I make sure that the services of financial institutions reach customers, and not only customers that are being reached today, which is easier, quote unquote, but also customers that are in remote areas that have no interest of using financial services, etc. In Latin America, and specifically in Mexico, we have a major lack of interest in many players to use financial services because they don't trust them, because they don't like them, because they feel they're expensive. They feel they don't need it. I mean, when you look at the number of debit cards that are issued, nearly 60% are dormant every month, every week, all the time in Mexico, which means people have the instrument, but they don't use it. And that's a lack of trust. So the regulation, in a way, also has to make sure that users believe more, trust more in these services, and they start using them in a way. Now, I was talking earlier about the API ecosystem and open banking. The role of the bank is changing. I mean, we like to say at Accenture that these are the everyday banks. Banks are not only balance sheets for people to deposit and to withdraw for loans, they're also tools that have a lot of information about the way people live. They know how much money you make, they know where you're spending it, etc. And more than thinking about all of those things as a tool for whatever purposes, the bank itself is changing its role in everyday lives of people, and they can be very powerful tools to make life better. And when I look at the emergence of all these services and the way they use and partner with banks, it is critical that regulation respects that, sets boundaries, particularly when it comes to confidentiality and the use of personal information, but those boundaries have to make sure that they don't prevent the growth of these services. So the short of it is yes, I mean, I think that regulation will always be a little behind, particularly in such a dynamic sector as this. It's very interesting when you ask people, when you ask users, and particularly say fintechs across the region, whether they believe regulation is insufficient or excessive. Depending on where you ask, you're going to get both extremes with a lot of responses. And particularly when it comes to digital banking, people at the same time feel that it's overly regulated, it's difficult to get a license, it's difficult to operate in many ways, etc. And at the same time, they feel that the regulation is lacking. We have a law in Mexico that was passed relatively recently that is actually very advanced. So it promotes sandboxing, crowdfunding, it promotes the use of cryptocurrencies, etc. We have a lot of fintechs in Mexico. I think we are still the country in Latin America that has the largest number of fintechs. That is remarkable, and we have to take advantage of that. And it speaks about the entrepreneurial appetite of the Mexican. It speaks about the way the system has been growing and the needs that it has. And it speaks of an interest of the banks themselves to partner with companies and to be more efficient. Because, I mean, it's very often, if you don't have the balance sheet or the client base that the large bank have, it's very difficult to be a fintech. So the partnership, I think, is growing. We see all the time at Accenture with our clients in the major banks an increasing way in which these institutions are collaborating, and collaboration is not an easy thing to attain. So probably more regulation will be coming as the services progress and become much more complex. But I think, quite frankly, that what we have today is a very good basis, and it's being shown in the results.
Thank you, Juan. I'd like to pick your brains on something that the four of you touched upon, and it's the issue of trust and security. You all deal with what is basically the most important part of people's lives, and that's all our information. So basically, you know more of me than I do. And that happens all the time. Every time I buy something online, it's like, oh, they know me better than I do. No? So you're dealing with our lives, maybe in bits and pieces, but you're dealing with all our information. What are you doing from your own sides to gain the trust of your clients and to promote the trust of your clients, to defend that trust? Because, for example, if something happens with a credit card or with a credit card is hacked, or something happens in the app and some money disappears, I don't know, whatever, maybe I can have the idea to go to the bank and the time to spend hours with a customer representative on the phone. But if we're trying to deal with financial inclusion, this issue becomes very important. How do you deal with that? Kristen?
Well, I think for us, obviously it's a very big issue. When we talk about trust, I already mentioned this, but we're coming from a place of trust because we have a user base that's already using our platform and using the service. And we obviously have a dedicated fraud team, dedicated tech team, dedicated customer service, right? So for us to be able to, number one, use technology to spot problems. So really relying on tech to help us look and be able to realize, like, there's something strange happening in this area, that's a spike of orders that does usually happen, or that's activity from a user that never buys in that way. So really relying on technology to help us solve that problem. And then having experts, obviously, in the area to guide the internal strategy. And then the most importantly is to have a human approach, right? So we want to use the experts in fraud, and we want to use the technology, but we need to be able to respond really quickly when there is a problem. So I think that those are the three ways that we do that. And then when we're talking about our FinTech service, we already talked about sort of the natural progression of, a Rappi courier becomes a user of RappiPay, and they can follow these steps to get to a credit level, for instance. But making sure that we monitor each step in the right way to be able to sort of vet this person and vet how this person is going to behave. And of course, at the root of that, we have really tight privacy restrictions and policies and internal trainings, and we're following sort of the European standards of privacy in the company as a whole.
Thank you. Christina, what has been your experience regarding this issue, trust and security and fidelity of the customers, with your experience in all the municipalities of Brazil?
Listen, trust is everything, right? It's the basis in which a brand is built. If you don't have trust, you don't have pretty much anything left. And starting in Brazil was a very, very interesting place to start because banks aren't loved anywhere, but they're especially hated there. You know, if you Google, I hate banks in Brazil or in Portuguese, you're gonna find pages and pages of people pouring their hate all over the internet. So the whole category was already seen as a villain, right? And if the banks were Darth Vader, the credit cards were like the Death Star, really, because in Brazil we have 400% a year APRs, right? We have, you know, these horrible fees that people do not understand, and people get snowballed into like the revolving credit. It's horrible, right? And we started from that place trying to build a love brand and trust. And it's funny because I used to tell my partner David to, you know, to prepare his spirit because we're gonna have to spend like a ton of money marketing because people just hate it, right? Like they hated the category. How are they gonna, you know, even be interested, even care about us? And the truth that we found was that people were just so ready for an alternative. People are just so ready to see someone actually for the first time acknowledging how bad everything was and how different it ought to be. So the minute that we started just doing the bare minimum, just treating people like people, just, you know, providing a service that actually worked, and, you know, taking the calls whenever they came, and solving people's problems whenever they had them, you know, it was just like this amazing thing that we saw, this viral thing happening, and people telling their friends and family, people asking us if they could please refer our card to their customer, to their friends. It's amazing. And I think, of course, we had an advantage in the sense that we started with a credit card. And it's one thing to build trust with a credit product in the sense that we're taking the risk. If customers don't like us, they won't pay us. You know, we're taking the risk. It's different from a debit card or an account in which people have to trust you in the first place, right? Like to give you the money. So sure, we had that advantage, but we also worked really hard to earn that trust that people were, you know, giving us. So we did exclusively credit cards for 4 years before we felt that we had earned the right to offer our customers anything else. Because the last thing that we wanted was for them to feel that it wasn't about them. It was about us. It was about our growth. It was about profits. It was because it has always been about them. It has always been about solving their pain and their needs. So only when we felt that we were strong enough, resilient enough in the credit card space that we moved on to the savings space and so on. So I guess trust is hard. It's extremely critical, but it's attainable when consumers really feel that your business is about them, you know, when incentives are aligned. And we've always wanted customers to feel that way, that we were on their side, not against them.
Thank you. What do you think about that? You're exactly in the same position as Christina. What do you think? Do you think that Mexicans, we hate banks as much as Brazilians do, or we don't hate them that much?
In my experience, and for the customers that we work with, they don't hate the banks. I think we give them a lot of opportunities, and the other opportunities they have is the loan shark in their town, right? So it's an opportunity for them to save, to be secure. And I'm going to give you an example. I think one of the things is the people that works in our branches is part of their same community, right? So they deal with people that they work with and they know. And one of the things that we have done for doing, of course, financial inclusion, but also digital inclusion, is having a team of people in every single branch that helps our clients to download the app and understand the value of that. And the value of that, the way that we explain to it, is not for taking another loan and opening another product. Is because these women who takes half an hour from their house to the bank, to the branch, to make a deposit or make a transaction, they can do it now from the security of their home at any time they want. They save in transportation, and they don't have to leave their children at home. And when they know and understand all these benefits, I think that you bring a relationship of trust and community and helping each other that it's really valuable. And the other side, of course, there are moments that you you have problems and there are systems and there's fraud, yes, and that's a reality that we need to face as an institution. So we have the appropriate systems in place and processes in place to deal with that, and also we have the fallback and all the customer service required to do that in the case of those exceptions.
Thank you. Juan, let me start with you the closing round. So if you don't mind, your final comment.
Very good. Thank you very much. It's very easy. I mean, I was saying at the beginning of the importance of empowering and making sure that women are included in the financial services sector. I think it's easier than that. The world just cannot afford to have half of the population not being taken advantage of. And I think that one of the most important characteristics here is that the diversity, the completeness, the integration, the trust. I mean, we're talking about trust. What team can be trusted more than a team that is naturally diverse, that has ideas that complement each other, that have ways of thinking, ideas that are bold and aspirational, and that aspire to create a better world, a better society, and this is a way to do it. We've been talking about data, we've been talking about services, about technology itself. We communicate in many ways, and one of those ways is what we say and how we say it, and the other category is what we don't say and how we don't say it. And I think that this trust, this network that the system is creating is understanding better the different roles of this type of communication. And one very good way to do it is making sure that teams are diverse and they grow. Let's make sure that we untap that tremendous value that is hidden, that is dormant there in the economy. Let's do it by creating a better world for future generations. We are a lot, natural resources. I mean, we all know this story. I think that the best way to do it is to make sure that we use all of the information and make it productive in the benefit of everybody else.
Thank you, Juan. Mercedes, your final comment.
Thank you. There are many things that I would like to say, but I was really moved these 2 years for all these women and men that are really worried and working every day to make equality and parity for women. So I just want to tell you that as for the first time that I'm here, it's a very encouraging and also makes a commitment and an obligation for everyone who is here for the first time or looks at this from the social networks to do more about this. And one of our values in the bank is creating prosperidad incluyente, including prosperity. And I think that's part, and that's the commitment in our bank, and I think in our society for other parts of the community that's not as fortunate as us, because many of us here are really, really fortunate. So it just gives me a lot of purpose, and thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Mercedes. Kristen.
Thank you. So my final thought is that if we, all of us, everyone working in this area, if we continue to create financial platforms that everyone has access to, then that turns into financial products that everyone has access to, and that's truly how we will be a more inclusive industry. And that's really my closing.
Thank you. Christina.
I want to start just by thanking you again for having me, and also by saying that I'm so sad that I missed the first day of the event and the first half of the event because I just landed and came here, and I'm leaving to the airport. So if I'm repeating something that was already said here, I'm sorry. But I couldn't help but mention the book by Melinda Gates that just came out, Moment of Lift. It just came out. She's doing her book tour in the US. I hope she makes it to the region because it's such a powerful message. And as we were talking about this, I'm halfway through, I haven't finished yet, but she has such a powerful framework on how to think about empowering women. She's been working in philanthropy and studying women in poverty and disease all over the world for 20 years now. And there's a very staggering truth on how much disease is caused by poverty, which is caused by women being not empowered to own their reproductive rights, or earn property, or get jobs, or have access to education. And in the Women's Forum, we just have to get the message out there. And the way that she frames it is just, we have to invest in women, in access to education, in access to financial control, to contraceptive information and birth control. Like, that is the key for lifting women and humanity everywhere. And I like to think that, at least in the region, from a financial inclusion standpoint, to the extent that we can provide women with the tools that they can get back the control of their financial lives and lift themselves and each other, I think we're off into a better path.
Well, great. Well, Ana Maria was asking you, I heard her asking you how many people had you met. I just want to tell her that I met just 4 amazing people, and I'm delighted to having met them. Thank you so much.